Shrine game, sing for the king.
The game is yours to play now.
The light provides.
This is Eventide Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Eventide Radio. This is a fan-made Destiny podcast where we have roundtable discussions about a variety of different topics concerning the popular video game franchise. At its core, the show is about having in-depth discussions about the game from a variety of different perspectives. I'm your host, Scotty, and with me is my co-host, Rob, and today we're talking about our first impressions of the new season of the Seraph. I believe this is like season 19, I think.
Correct.
So, to quote the Bungie.net page, how they describe it is that the Hive God of War, for the uninitiated, Xivu Arath, moves to seize control of Rasputin's network of weaponized satellites. In her hands, she would turn its devastating power on the last city. To stop her, the Vanguard has authorized special covert operations armed with the War Mind's most advanced weaponry. Agents conducting these operations are known as Seraphs. So, spoiler warning ahead for the first week of Season of the Seraph. We're recording this on the Monday after release, so tomorrow would start week 2. So we just got the week 1 content to talk about. We're going to be talking about the basic activities of the season, the whole gameplay loop, which includes the heist battlegrounds and the operations, I believe they're called. We'll talk about the story, and then we'll talk about some of the new loot we've got this season. So I'm going to skip the part where we talk about what we've been up to this week in Destiny, because I know exactly what we've been up to this week in Destiny. And that's what we've been doing the new season, of course. So let's just jump right into it. So, Rob, if you want to summarize in a couple sentences your first impression of Season of the Seraph, and then we'll save the dungeon for later. So don't include the dungeon.
Sure. Yeah. So we're focusing on just the season, not the dungeon. So that's an important distinction. Although if it comes up in conversation, I apologize. So first impressions. So I do want to, I know we've kind of talked about it in previous podcasts as we were getting closer to this season, kind of the general sentiment of the community that the seasonal model's getting stale, stagnation, we need some innovation, tired of the 7x3 grid, all that fun stuff, although this season it's 7x2, yada yada, all that stuff. Didn't have much expectations for it to change. Joe Blackburn has since come out after the season release and was like, yep, we're very much aware of the general fatigue of this seasonal model. Don't expect anything until maybe season 21 or later. They did say, I think, for Lightfall itself, that expansion, that they are going to be innovative. And I think he said, quote unquote, like take some risks with kind of the design and layout of kind of that part of it. So, all of that aside, I was kind of expecting the typical 7x grid. The seasonal activity itself, heist battlegrounds or battlegrounds heist, I think is very cool. I have been obviously very outspoken that the core playlists, so Strikes, Crucible, Gambit, are in dire need to kind of build on and expand on. And I am genuinely hoping that this and the PsyOps Battlegrounds from Season of the Risen, which is the Witch Queen launch season, I am hoping both of those get incorporated into the Vanguard/Strike playlist, because they are about the same length of Strikes. They kind of play out as Strikes. There's a boss at the end. It has those kind of like story beats, story in quotes, to the actual activity itself. They're fun, they're engaging. Like any seasonal thing, you're going to play the living hell out of it and kind of burn yourself out because you want to get all the different weapons and triumphs and all the fun stuff. But I like it. That's the TLDR version. It's cool. There's a really neat modifier that basically puts you always at 5 points or 5 power level or light level behind the enemies. So no matter what, you're always going to have a little bit of a difficulty to the encounter, as opposed to just being able to be over leveled and nuke everything, which is great. And that speaks to, hey, how are we going to innovate on difficulty? How do we make, how do we slowly maybe siphon out power level out of the game? And I think this is a step in the right direction. The difficulty felt fresh. It felt engaging. I actually was like needing to take cover behind things and plan out attacks and kind of coordinate. Like I ran some against with some randos and then also with some clanmates, and coordinating some of the attacks against certain enemies and things with teammates felt really, really good. And you were rewarded for having clever combat engagement. So I liked it. That's the short version.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. I wish I could be the voice of opposition and make this a little more interesting, but I agree. I actually I enjoy it, even though it is, the same seasonal model. That's not going to change for a while, but
Right.
I liked it. I like you said, I think the difficulty for the heist battleground thing is like very refreshing. Like you said, I think that's a good word for it because we haven't had a like seasonal or playlist activity that's been that challenging in a while. So
Right.
that's really nice. I think it's cool. People complain about not having a new location in this, but we technically do because we get to go deeper into the
Right.
bunkers and whatnot, and it's cool to see that and everything. I think there's some cool locations. The story of it is always really important for me. That's kind of why I checked out of Plunder because I didn't really care what was happening. It was getting a little redundant, but the concept for this one seems cool, and it's got some of my favorite and, in my opinion, some of the more well written characters in the game because it involves Osiris. I love Osiris. Clovis, I think, is awesome. Mara is somehow a part of this. I'm very surprised, but pleasantly surprised that she's going to be a
Sure.
part of this. I love the Ikelos weapons and stuff, if that's how you pronounce that. So those came back, and all the Seventh Seraph stuff in terms of like what loot we're getting. All in all, honestly, I think so far, it's cool. I like the core activities. I think the concept, story wise, is interesting, and looking forward to see where it goes. But to break this down, let's start by talking about Heist Battleground specifically. We already kind of touched on it, but this is kind of the main thing of the season as far as I'm concerned, because this is the thing you're going to be repeating over and over. So I want to say it's only the Moon one that's out, but I saw somewhere that
No, Europa is also available.
how do you get to the Europa one? Is that that's not part of the quest, is it? Like the main story quest?
So it's a little like buggy, we'll say. So you can access it from Europa from like the directory.
Okay.
But
It's not, is it part of the playlist?
so yes, it is.
I've never
You
gotten it.
you don't you don't have to play it first in order to access it. I was kind of wondering about that because the first couple times it was like I kept getting the moon. Um, have you actually unlocked access to the playlist? Because I know that was like kind of a weird thing the first day.
Yeah,
Um,
I believe so. I think I played through the whole opening quest line, and I'm
okay.
at the point where it's like you got to wait for Clovis to discover more information
Okay, so you did get because you have to get like 500 of the Seraph keys,
and open
because
the
that's all.
chests and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So you open the chest at the end of the playlist version. Okay, so it sounds like you did get, yeah. So there is the Europa version does appear, and it basically plays out, um, like the first level, the intro. So yeah, when you first load into the season, you start outside of kind of the Braytech facility. There's a new kind of mechanic, which we'll talk about also in the operations version, where there's the towers that you basically have to take cover from, and then in 15 seconds they lock onto you and immediately insta kill you. Because I did get hit by it once because I wanted to see what happens. It's pretty awesome. Um, but yeah, so you load into that same basic area. You have to infiltrate. You get all the way to Clovis Bray's head. Spoilers: there's a giant Clovis Bray head if you haven't done the Beyond Light campaign. Um, and then basically behind him opens another bunker, and that's where you jump down. So there's like kind of a big cliff pit behind him, and down below there's another bunker. And that's where you kind of continue on, and you have a different boss down there. I won't spoil it for you.
sweet.
But yeah, so there is the Europa version, and it, like I said, it plays out like the first mission. Obviously, there's a lot more enemies, and there's the Death Tongue or whatever the heck they're called, which we'll talk about also. But yeah, so there's two currently. I think there's going to be at least one more, maybe two more, that presumably get unlocked throughout the season. But as of right now, there's just the Moon and Europa one.
Gotcha. And then the operations are going to come out week to week.
Assuming yes. So we just had Archimedes, right? Is that the first one?
Yes.
Okay.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, for some reason, I never got the year. I've played the playlist a couple times. that
Okay.
I've only gotten the moon, so that's weird. But anyways,
Interesting. But you should be able to access it if you just want to like play it to play it. You should be able to access it from Europa
Europa.
in the
Okay.
directory. I believe so. And it's got
Okay.
like the little symbol with wings on it or whatever.
Yeah. I will go check that out then.
Okay.
What do you think of this activity as a whole? What do you think? Well, actually, let's start with what do you think of the towers and the battle song thing in that beginning part of these heist battlegrounds?
Yes.
So those
So
two new mechanics.
yes. So there's the towers, which are I think really neat because it adds a little bit of a like again playing into you have to be strategic. You can't just be out in the open hacking everything up. Um, because you will eventually get punished if you're exposed for too long. Um, so that's kind of neat. Uh, I like the operations mission because it actually, in order to infiltrate the bunker, there's a lot more of those towers, and so you're actually playing a little bit of a cat and mouse game, which is cool. But then the death tongue, I can't think of what they're called. I'm blanking on it. Or song singer
I
tongue
know, I
things.
know battle song is what the mechanic is called. I don't know
Yeah,
who the people are that
I know.
sing said song.
Well, I normally I'm looking at like dim and like reading all the little like currency cues and things like that and um the triumph so I can kind of reference those things. But yeah, essentially there's an acolyte that's got a hell of a lot of health and each one of the heists it appears at the begin it's pretty early on in the moon one and then the Europa one it's like about halfway through when it appears. So it's at a different place, but basically there's like one of those like hive spire things and the acolyte will appear and he'll kind of make a mad dash for that spire and you'll get like an audio cue that lets you know and like Mara Sov will call out like hey you better go stop him because if the acolyte gets to the spire and completes the song ritual then basically there's like a huge buff to all the enemies around including the champions and they are a hell of a lot harder to kill as well as your abilities get either drained or like suppressed. But it's a bad time for you. And so there's like a triumph to actually like kill them before they're able to successfully like get the battle song. And so the idea is, and this makes it very difficult when you're playing with randoms versus like in a, with actually being able to communicate, because basically as soon as they appear, you all want to concentrate fire on it. And if maybe burn your super on it, you'll kill it, but it not only do you not get the triumph progress, but it also punishes you pretty severely. And it's cool. It's a neat mechanic because it again, you can't just hack away at everything because usually a bunch of other enemies appear at the same time. And so you have to kind of like make that choice of not focusing on all these other ads, but just trying to take out one sole enemy. But the benefit in the long run is it makes all the other enemies easier to kill once you take him down, which is really cool. And I think during the Lightfall reveal, they hinted that there's going to be those darkness enemies that basically do something similar, where they drain your ability energy, or they kind of semi suppress you. And so this is kind of like an early precursor to that, and it plays really really well to the battle scenario. Where again, the complaint that people have been having, especially since the subclass 3.0 came out, is like you can just torch an entire field of enemies um, pretty easily. And so coming up with these kind of new clever ways where you have to actually think about how you're engaging with that specific area and those enemies and how you're kind of dealing combat. Um, there's actually thought that goes into it now. And so it's kind of nice to have that conversation with your teammates of like, no, we need to go for it, drop everything you're doing. Um,
Totally.
it's a breath of fresh air and it's nice. And I
Yeah,
dig it.
I'm totally with you. It adds to like the this is not my original analogy, but someone else used the analogy of like the chess game idea of where you have to
Mhm.
like prioritize certain enemies on the field depending on the situation. So, oh, I got to kill this guy before I kill this guy, or so and so, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. So that's a very cool idea. And like you said, we have so many like AOE clear options
Right.
that it's nice to challenge that in a sense.
Right.
The fact that we have new mechanics happening here at all that aren't like Gambit or ball related is awesome. So glad.
Yes.
It's amazing. I just wish they were in like the rest of the heists because they're only at the beginning,
Right.
at least in the moon one. And I kind of wish they were in the rest of them because I think it's a cool idea because you get to fight like one of those battle song death tongue people
Right.
once, and then you're kind of done. And I wish you got to do it more. And the towers are cool too. I wish there was like that mechanic was worked in somehow through the rest of it. But either way,
Yeah.
it's very cool. I mean, I think it's a neat idea, and I hope it gets, I don't know, built upon in the future.
Yeah.
But
So without giving up too much, the Europa one does kind of, I'll say, semi-remedying this. Like, you still only have the one death tongue, but each kind of segment has like a different flavor. So you first get into the Braytech facility, and you have to clear out enemies, and there's some champions, and you have to kind of hop back and forth between the two areas. And then you get into where you're kind of descending down to Bray's head, and that's where the death tongue is. I keep wanting to say death singer, but that's not what it is. It's not ear ute. But you take him out, and then when you get to Clovis Bray's head, there's actually a different kind of thing that you have to accomplish there. That's different from the mission. It's different from the Hive chant. But it's different. And I will say it's interesting, and it at least kind of again forces you to think a little bit about how you're engaging with the combat.
uh-huh.
And then you get down to the bunkers, and you have to do a very similar thing where you have to steal like the battery so you can break the seals. And then the boss arena is different. So I will say there's probably 3 or 4 different types of things to do throughout the Europa one. That I do agree with you that the moon one feels a little samey relative, but I
Mhm.
will say the Europa one is a little more engaging. And hopefully you'll kind of see what I mean when you finally do get it.
Okay, sweet.
But I agree it would be nice to see more specifically that, but then it might feel kind of samey when you're doing like 2 or 3 of those throughout the same battlegrounds. So at least like each, we'll say, room has a different thing to do, to a certain degree. So it at least kind of breaks up the monotony. Or
Yeah, for
um
sure.
so but I do agree with your sentiment. Like, it's kind of a bummer there's only one of those, where it'd be kind of neat if maybe they were a little bit easier, but there was more of them, or maybe at one point there's like 2 of them.
Mhm.
And so just something to kind of change up that strategy. But I do agree with you. It's kind of a bummer you only get one throughout the entire encounter, where it's like, oh, this is kind of a neat mechanic. Can we have more of this?
Yeah, it feels like they were like unconfident in their own
Yes.
like thing that they made. They're like, we'll just only put a little bit of it in
Right.
at the beginning. I was like, no, I like it. But how do these battlegrounds compare to the ones from say Season of the Chosen for you?
I like these more. Um it's funny, just before we started recording, I was doing a little bit of just playing strikes because I felt like kind of just finishing some bounties. And I did the first Psyops Battlegrounds that you do, the one on Nessus. Um that was pretty cool. I would say this and the you were asking about the, yeah, Season of the Chosen. Um I would say these ones and the Psyops Battlegrounds are way more interesting. And it show like you can kind of really, now that we've had kind of 3 iterations of these battlegrounds, you can really kind of see the development in terms of like complexity, engagement. It's not just throw a bunch of ads, which was one of the positive things about the Season of the Chosen one, where it's like, okay, we at least have a lot of enemies to deal with, and it can be overwhelming if you're not paying attention. So that's a good start. But then like the psyops ones added a little bit of like a mechanic thing with like the psionic sphere or spear, and like in the one on the Cosmodrome, you're escorting a cart. Like, so that's, again, you're like doing something other than just going to a location, nuking enemies, going to another location. Like, you have to be doing something cognizant along the way to make the progress. Um, and with this, you're still killing enemies, but you have to do it in a craftful way. So it's like it at least feels different. And again, harping and iterating on that kind of initial idea of just going to a place and killing enemies. And even then, the battlegrounds had you pick up the batteries and blow up the generator. So I'll give it credit for at least that. It's like something different. So I would say these are definitely more interesting and engaging, and the locales are cool. Like you said, I like all the war mine, the Seraph bunker, like that art aesthetic is really, really neat.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of fun to like when you think about, and you could kind of say, well, it's all retconned or whatever, but like when you think about like going back to playing D1 and you first land on the moon, and then now you know, like, oh, this bunker's been here all along. It kind of adds some cool, almost like mystique to it, where it's like, what else is hiding underneath, and kind of adds to the excitement. So it's like the deeper you go into the bunker, it's more and more exciting, where it's like, wow, this is all, and it all still feels very samey, or not samey, but it all still feels like it belongs into the universe that we've been slowly building up for the last 8 years. So I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. I think I'm with you. I think either the psyops or the heist ones that we have this time would be my favorite iteration of the battlegrounds. I can't decide though, because honestly, the psyops ones were kind of cool. I haven't played them in a while, but when you mentioned like the synaptic spear and stuff, I'm thinking back to like those like Savathun boss fights were pretty sick.
Yeah.
I don't know, but yeah, I like this. The Warmind aesthetic is really neat, and I love seeing the like. It's always impressive seeing like the scale of these like Warmind facilities.
Right.
They just keep going and going, and then there's these like vast open spaces, like on the moon one where you have to like open the door, like the seals and stuff. If you look like left or right, there's just these like extremely long hallways of just stuff all over the place.
Yeah.
And I'll bring up the dungeon for like 5 seconds because in that like the first jumping part of that, because that's also a Warmind thing, as far as I'm concerned. But there's a bunch of like you could just like see just how huge this place is, and it's always very cool.
Yes.
I think it's a cool aesthetic,
Yeah.
cool area to explore. Let's discuss the operations. I believe that's what they're called, right? Because this one was called Operation Archimedes, so I'm assuming they're all called Operation something.
I believe so.
All right, sweet. So I think these are essentially the story missions, quote unquote, kind of like in the first thing that came to mind was the Splicer missions.
Right.
So like that. So this first one, we go to the EDZ, and different mechanics a little bit. There's more towers in the beginning. I could say that. Right. Which was cool. And you get inside. Eventually, the boss is different. You fight an ogre. I'm trying to remember correctly. You fight a big ogre, and it's a Wrathborn ogre.
Right.
And I thought it was super cool when Anna was referencing the Season of the Hunt stuff. She's like, "Oh, I read about this in Crow's journals."
Yes, his field logs or whatever.
Yeah. And so you do the same kind of mechanic you did with the Wrathborn guys from Season of the Hunt, where you have to kill a particular enemy, stand in the pool to deal damage to break their shield, which was cool. It was a cool little callback.
Yep.
I don't think it's a bad idea to reuse that mechanic. I thought that was neat. But what did you think of our first Season of the Seraph quote unquote story mission?
So I'm gonna throw a couple things out. So first of all, I really liked the mission. I thought having we'll call it a stealth part, felt really cool. It was giving me a little bit of the do you remember in the Taken King when you go basically to the Crotozen raid and you have to like you're invisible and you have to like avoid the being picked up by the scent of like by the hive or whatever, and if they track you then they like kill you. Vaguely. So yes, you have to get a piece of a part of Crota's like essence or whatever, and so you have to go to where they're having his like funeral.
Was it his throne room or was it the beginning?
So you basically you start at the beginning of the raid. I call it a dungeon. You basically start at the end of the first encounter where you cross the Bridge of Light and go into Crota's Throne World. And you have to like cross the bridge, and the entire time it's actually done in third person, which is like the only mission I think we've ever done that's third person. And like basically there's like a red ring around each of the hive because they're basically kind of patrolling around. And if you walk in that, they detect you because they can like smell you or something. Because like the first mission where you go to the Cosmodrome, you have to steal the stealth technology. That Cade teaches you how to like go invisible,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
you're
yeah.
basically running around, and then you have to get all the way up to where you did the Ear-Ute in the final encounter with Crota, and you have to absorb part of his essence and then survive while Eris Morn like pulls you out. And it's like the third or fourth mission of the Taken King. But basically it plays all like stealth because you have to like kind of follow the patterns of the hive walking back and forth. And it's just completely different from anything that the game had ever thrown at you before. And this kind of feels that same way where you're like, wow, I have to actually like look for cover and be kind of stealthy. And because you have like a 15-second time from the moment the lasers spot you to when they evaporate you, essentially. And so you have to kind of like, and once you go into cover, you don't immediately refresh it. You have to like kind of let the cooldown come up, and then you get that full 15 seconds back. And so you have to kind of think harshly. And at the same time, there's hive that are kind of shooting at you. And so you like, well, do I peek out of cover so I can take this thing out? Or do I let it kind of continue to shoot at me and then just kind of keep running? So again, there was some actual like thought and innovation put into it. I enjoyed it. My only wish, and this is going to be kind of an elitist mentality, I kind of wish it was like a darkness zone. So if you screwed up, you had to like start
Start
over.
over. I was gonna
Um,
say something similar. I wish it was harder, to be
yeah,
honest.
I do too. And this is the first one of its kind, so maybe they'll get progressively harder. But I really did like it. And again, it's just because it felt so different than anything we've really gotten in a long time. That's neat. And you brought up the Season of the Splicer, the I forgot what those
I forget
missions are
what they're called
called.
too.
And some of them felt kind of samey because it was just like a big vast jumping puzzle, but at least it was like different. It wasn't my favorite activity, but it was different and had like a mix of combat and jumping, and it was kind of hectic because you had to do it like quickly, and it was just different, And I know keep saying that word but that's been kind of the theme recently of a lot of stagnation, and so something like this gets brought to the table, and it just feels so much more fun than like Catch Crash or Expedition.
Where it's just the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah, where it's like they're taking the core elements of the game and trying to twist it in some way that like, oh, I've never thought about playing Destiny this way. And that's the cool part.
Yeah.
So I do like that. I'm okay with the Wrathborn thing because ultimately those were always pitched as, part of Xivu Arath's army, so it makes sense that they would be back in some capacity. And in
Absolutely.
fact, those weird like twisty pillar things that come out are scattered all over the Heist Battlegrounds missions themselves, so it makes sense. Like this is all Xivu Arath related. I don't have a problem. Like, people always get mad at reusing assets, and it's like, well, but at this point, we've established such a kind of cohesive universe where you're going to have reused assets, quote unquote, because this has been established as this sort of signature of this enemy, and like they're going to use this, like this is their weapon, so you're going to see it over and over again. And as long as they kind of use it in interesting ways, which I think they did, right? You're not doing Wrathborn hunts, you're just like you're seeing those like twisty tree things. I don't remember what they're called, but because that's what Xivu Arath uses to like empower her hive enemies or whatever. Like it's just it makes sense, and so it's cool to see those. And yeah, like you said, you have to kind of stand in the pool to break their shield. Again, minor mechanic, kind of interesting. It's fun, like you said, the little throwback to talking about his field report journals. That's cool. I dig all of it. My one Here's going to be my one complaint. Uh, that opening area of the Archimedes mission
Yeah.
sorely needs to be a PvP map. Uh,
Just like the
the
rocky,
outdoor, like
snowy.
rocky
Okay.
mountain,
Yeah.
yeah. Like we've been. I'm gonna put my PvP hat on for a minute. We've been dying and begging for new PvP maps for, well, literally years at this point. And people were making a big stink last season because they were reusing old lost sectors to do these like dungeon fights with the pirates or whatever. And I had no problem with that. Like, okay, we don't really have time to develop these things you're only going to use once. And here we're doing this mission that we're only going to do once, and they go through the effort to develop this super elaborate, really nice looking landscape that, to be honest, kind of felt like an old Halo map. Like I was talking to some of my clanmates, and it's like this kind of like couldn't remember the name of it because it's literally been like almost a decade probably since I played some of those maps. But it's like why aren't we getting PvP maps if they're going to go through the effort to make these like landscape areas that felt pretty vast? Like that area felt like it had some size to it. It bums me out that like, are we only going to play that area once and then never see it again? And it's like, if that's the case, then why even put it together? Like, it just, the priorities seem odd. That would be my one complaint. And I know it's kind of like a weird stipulation, but it's like here, it's a really cool designed area where there's cover and rock formations, and it all kind of is in the service of the story elements of these towers. So you have these like keep out zones so you don't get blasted by the lasers. And it's like, okay, just take that, make two symmetric versions of that, stick them together, and you have a PvP map. Like, why aren't we getting things like that? Like, it just shows that they can develop really cool areas. But then we get something like Disjunction, which is like so bizarre. It's weird. So that would be my one complaint is turn that into a PvP map. Just like I still absolutely would have loved the idea if the Glycon, like after we cleared out, if we had turned like the big high bay into a PvP map where it's like the backdrop would be awesome because it's just outer space behind you. And if you fall off the side, that's it, you're done. But like you have these like, there's like ships in the hangar and there's these platforms up above. Like, why not just make a big hangar map in the Glycon? But
To
instead,
play devil's
yeah.
advocate, they probably have to rework it so that it actually functions like an
Oh,
actual
yeah.
PvP map. So they'd have to like, I mean, I don't know how much work it is to take a pre-existing area and then tweak it so that it like functions for a PvP work. I don't know if that is the equivalent of recreating it from the ground up or what. But I guess they can't just like copy and paste an area and then be like, here's a Crucible map. Because then like people who do play Crucible, they'll be like, it doesn't work, spawns are bad, etc., etc. And there's probably like I don't personally know the science to creating a functional PvP map, but I'm sure there's like something goes into it.
You're absolutely correct. I completely understand and acknowledge that I don't know what goes into making a map. To play devil's advocate to your devil's advocate, they have explicitly taken PvP maps and turned them into missions. Like when we did the Devil's Ruin quest, they were able to make it so you just load up where did the Battle of Six Fronts take place? I can't think of that map right now. But you like go around and
right? Wait, Twilight Gap?
Yeah, Twilight Gap. Yeah, I don't know why I couldn't remember that. But you go around scanning like the exoframes, and it gives you that whole mission. So, like, you can just take areas and turn them into missions. So,
sure, but I feel like taking a PVE area, because there's not like a whole lot of like science that goes into like making an open PVE area, right? With like the towers and everything. It's just like a big open space with rocks to hide behind. But I feel like if you made a PvP area, there's like a bunch of other stuff that has to go into it to make it work. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to take like a Crucible map and like a bunch of like exo bodies on there and call it a mission. Because that works. But I feel like if you took a PvE area and just like put some spawns on there, called it a day, I feel like it wouldn't work out as well.
Certainly the balance aspect and spawn locations, like obviously that takes time to iterate on.
Sure.
But I was always under the impression like creating the assets and developing the actual landscape and
was like the hard part.
Yeah, that was my understanding. Once you have that, then it's just sticking spawn points. Yeah, like and I know I'm way oversimplifying something that's probably very complicated, but like making a rock look like a rock seems more difficult than setting waypoints.
Yeah, Yeah.
which, but again, I could be very, very wrong. The few map editors and asset things that I've played with over the years, making the rock is way more difficult than
actually deciding where
saying,
things
hey,
go.
you spawn here if there's no other enemies nearby.
Yeah, fair
I'm
enough.
getting ahead of myself. I'm probably making a jackass of myself, and I do apologize. But all I'm getting at, though, is like time went into developing this really, really cool landscape, and I would just love like that at least the inspiration for the layout of that. I would love to see translated into a PvP map, and maybe that should be kind of the thesis of what I'm trying to say is just like the area that they built for this mission was really cool, and they cleverly designed the cover to play into the keep out zones of the towers so they don't melt you as you're trying to kind of traverse and get to the bunker. Like someone there has a really cool idea of making the landscape work for the theme, and it just seems like iterating on that to turn it into a PvP map so that you use things like rocks and cover seems plausible to do.
Sure. I think that would be really cool. I think I want to see more maps, like big maps. And I don't know how practical this is for Destiny's sandbox, but in like Halo, like something like Blood Gulch or
Right.
Valhalla or something would be super cool. Something,
Yes.
those like big open areas. That would be neat to see. Anyways, PvP rant over. Little teaser for my
Another
PvP.
conversation. Yeah.
Why is Rift in comp? Question we may
I
never have the answer to.
I actually so we won't go down the avenue of talking about comp yet and the changes made, but I have started playing comp. I, for the record, am not a fan of the title Glorious, and I'm bummed out that Unbroken can no longer be gilded, which there was no indication that they were actually going to, like, they said they were going to retire the title, but they never indicated that you wouldn't be able to gild it anymore. So it's the first guildable title that's been retired, which bums me out.
That's so sad.
Because I went through the effort to like unlock it so that I could continue to gild it at least. But anyway, I'm not a fan of the title Glorious, but I was like, I'm going to play comp with all the new changes. I'm digging the actual like how the ladders work and all that stuff. But a lot of people were complaining like, why is Rift in comp for 3v3? I think it actually works really well. Because you basically have a runner, someone playing offense, and someone kind of playing defense. And so if you have a really good team, it's kind of neat having those roles. I don't know why Disjunction is one of the maps for 3v3 comp. I think that's a horrible, horrible idea. But they added Wormhaven as one of the Rift maps, which is perfect because it's really small and it works well as a 3v3. And it goes pretty quick if your team is like not coordinated because the path from the getting the spark to actually dunking it is super short, like comically short. But it shows that they took another symmetric map and made a Rift map out of it. So that makes me happy. But I actually liked Rift in comp, that I think it works well as like an objective, where like I played some really good matches where there was some nail biter finishes, and Rift was actually pretty fun for that. So that was my short spiel about comp and Rift. And I think it was a fun addition to add.
Okay, fair enough. We'll dive into that later, but
Yes.
I respect your opinion. So now that we've discussed the main activity, the like secondary activity, let's talk about the story, if you will. So the idea of this one is, I kind of said this at the beginning, but Ziva Wrath wants to take over Rasputin's network, and Osiris is back to life because of magical darkness soup, and
We'll talk about that.
and Anna Bray is trying to put Rasputin in a exo engram, and I kind of forget the reasoning, but they're like, you know who could help us with this? Oh yes, they needed Clovis's help because of like he could hack into like Rasputin's codes or something. So
Right.
they go talk to the grumpy old robot man, and they recruit him onto their team. So Clovis is back. They put him in like an exo frame without arms or legs, which is convenient. And so he's just like, he's got a little robot crane that he uses. He can go up and down. He can't go anywhere else.
Yeah, I've heard people explicitly go back in and out of the room just to make him like crane over.
I've seen that. He just goes up and down,
Yeah.
back and forth. But yeah, they recruit Clovis, and they're trying to. What are they trying to do? Get like Rasputin data to. What are they doing?
So my understanding, yeah. So Rasputin was put in an engram at the beginning of Beyond Light, and Anna reveals that he's kind of like degrading. That it's like it's unstable for him to stay in there, which makes sense. And yeah, she built that exobody, and it basically she's having a difficult time getting Rasputin to like meld with it, and because Clovis Bray is sort of the foremost authority on exos and transferring intelligence to that, I think he's trying to. Why he needs to be in the body itself isn't quite clear to me yet.
I think it's fun.
But
Just like
people are pointing out, like, is it really a good idea to take Clovis to put him on the helm where the Crown of Sorrow is and where the parts of Nezarec are? Like people are like, he's gonna screw us over, isn't he? Like this is what's gonna be kind of the next iterative like downfall that leads into the events of like Lightfall. Like my prediction is we'll be able to save Rasputin, but like Clovis Bray is going to get in. He's going to hack into the system somehow and f some things up. That's kind of my prediction for how the season will end.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
But yeah, so yeah, he's transferred his conscience or his AI self into the body that will eventually be used for Rasputin, I think, so that he can kind of like study it, work on his code, work on Rasputin's code, that is to say, and try to get it to like properly adapt to the exo frame.
Gotcha.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just
because
cannot remember.
Yeah,
for the life of me, what we were doing week to week.
Yeah,
because it gets kind of, well, that brings me to my next complaint. And again, this will change at some point, but not only does the whole seasonal model affect the gameplay week to week, but it also affects the narrative because they've got to set up a concept / plot that like you progress week to week, and like this time it's we got to go get Rasputin data every week. Check back next week so Clovis can get more stuff, and then you go do the same thing, and then you do it next week, and it makes all of the seasons feel very similar in terms of plot structure because the plot structure is exactly the same for all of them.
Yep. They're gonna spoon feed you just little bits and pieces of it, but ultimately it's all in the service of you're doing the same thing so that you can check back in next week and maybe there's progress.
Yeah, it gets a little annoying, but besides that, I mean, the concept is cool. I'm just glad to have like Clovis, interesting character. I like Osiris. We'll talk about him in a second.
Yep.
Anna's back. I don't mind Anna. I've never been like a massive fan of her character, but I don't mind her. Mara Sov is back, which I'm very surprised because they usually like save her for things. She just comes and goes as she pleases in random moments, and then usually whenever she shows up, something's really important. So that's exciting. And I guess it makes sense that she's here. Mara is fighting with Xivu Arath apparently in like the Ascendant plane, kind of spinning out of Season of the Lost. Because Xivu Arath is using like the ley line in the Ascendant plane to like mobilize her forces there. So they're going back and forth. There's like a lore tab or two about them fighting. I think that the new exotic this season has a pretty good lore piece about them having like a little mental battle. It was pretty cool. But yeah, it's cool to have Mara there. I am surprised that Mara is so involved with us because normally she's very hands off unless it's absolutely necessary. So it's weird that she's playing like a side character in this and also like checking in with us with video messages and stuff because it feels like she is very uncharacteristic of her to do. because in the past she's always very much like, I am doing my own thing. I do not care about you unless I need to use you as a tool. So we it feels like we're kind of like in a partnership right now, and it has that energy to it. So that's kind of interesting. But I will open the floor up to you to discuss your thoughts, because I know what your thoughts are. But I'd like for you to share them on the end of Season of the Plunder and Osiris's reintroduction.
Yeah, so
Planet 11.
you and I kind of briefly talked about this. I was disappointed slashed slash kind of confused on Season of the Plunder, and how those events kind of led into this season. Um, I I could be mistaken, but at no point was I aware that during Season of the Plunder that the intent was to take the parts of Nezarec and turn him into a tea to bring back Osiris. Like, unless I missed that, like, it didn't, like, it was just sort of like, hey, Aramis is going for these. We need to get them before she gets them. And it was kind of like, well, it's probably into the service of for the darkness. But like that seemed like that was the point of getting those urns, was to prevent Aramis from getting some power or evil from them.
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, now we have all of them. What are we going to do with them? And then it was like a week before the next season starts. It's like, oh, they can be used as a tea to bring back Osiris, which had never been mentioned to my knowledge or understanding the entire season. And it was cool that we brought him back. It just kind of felt like it should have been brought up as like as the season was going on to like incentivize us, or like maybe even halfway through, uh Misrax tells Saint 14 like, hey, maybe there's a way we could bring Osiris back, and then like Osiris gets on the comms and is like, yeah, let's go prevent these guys from getting these, and let's get those urns, just to give some kind of like reason or encourage us to have all of that. It felt like at the 11th hour it's like, oh, we got to bring Osiris back. Like, well, we got this MacGuffin that we've been pursuing this whole time, like, let's make them merge together, and there you go. That was what we could do all along, and it just kind of felt like I don't remember that being discussed. So that was like my only complaint, was like, is that what we were trying to do all along, or just conveniently you could mash up old man parts and turn it into a tea to take someone out of a coma? Like, it felt weird.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
an uncalled for, or if that was the intent, it should have been hinted at or led up to more of that all along. Now maybe there's going to be some repercussion, because now like Osiris has essence of Nezarec in him or something, and maybe eventually that'll corrupt him or something, and that would be interesting. But it just felt like there should have been a little more of an indication of that throughout the season, to kind of like have it all make sense at the end. So that final cutscene was like, oh, that was the point.
Yep.
I didn't hate it. I just kind of was a little confused. Like I felt like I had missed something throughout the entire season that was just like, but to my knowledge, there was no hint that that was the intent. It just
Yep.
kind of worked out.
I think you're right. I think it was just a Deus Ex Machina situation. Where
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfectly said. That's how it felt.
Yeah, because I think that's totally what it is. Here's a very convenient solution to a problem that we just didn't discuss. Like,
Right.
this is just what's going to happen because this is what we need to happen. So, yeah, I didn't like that either. But what do you think of having Osiris back? Do you like having him back as a character? Do you like his interactions with Clovis and Anna?
Yeah, he's definitely got that. So I really liked that first transmission where Osiris is like, how do you like your tea?
Dude,
Um,
I
that was
actually love
cool.
that conversation so much.
Yeah, I really, really liked it, where he kind of gets a little intense, where he's like, I used to not pay attention and I was kind of a dick. And look at, like, for the longest time we were separated, and it means something, and then it's like, so I'm gonna ask you again, how do you want your tea?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just really cool. I liked that interaction, and I always like those little dialogue things where it just builds
Me
character
too. Me too.
across. Um, Very cool.
I'm gonna
Uh,
interrupt you really quick. I have it
yeah.
written down. I'm gonna just read his last
Oh,
little
please
couple
do.
sentences.
Please do.
So after they talk, right? They're talking about the coffee and tea and whatever. And his last little thing that he says to Anna before it ends, he says, "Your work will outlive you. The people around you might not. One day you're going to wake up, assuming you've slept it all, and realize that the world is a very different place than the last time you remember to look at it. You will abruptly, viscerally regret the absence of something as small as a single cup of tea. So I ask you again, what would you like to drink?" It's such a good line. I loved that
Yeah.
conversation. It was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for actually. I'm glad that you wrote it down.
I did. I actually liked it that
Yeah.
much. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that was awesome.
Yeah. Because sometimes I'll listen to those. I'm like, yeah, I kind of zone out, and then it was like, oh, this is intense.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very heartfelt and nice. And again, it reminds us that we're in this very complex world with these these characters
Mm-hmm.
that have feelings and stories and life to them, and it adds some humanity,
Yeah.
ironically, even to a robot. So yeah, no, I thought that was really cool, and I'm like very excited for whatever future iterations we'll get, because I hope there's more of that kind of stuff. um and these are always cool because it's like we've never really had a Osiris and Anna interaction, to my knowledge.
Mm-hmm. I think
And
so too.
so it's kind of neat to get that. And it always just like, what permutation of characters can we get, and what are going to be their priorities and things like that. And so it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And
I love mixing and matching
yeah,
different
and
characters.
even kind of, I'm sure there's lore cards, but sort of, how do I want to say this? Like, the Saint 14 was just sort of gone in the depths of time for however long.
Yeah.
And like, what was Osiris's kind of interpretation of that time versus like how long Saint 14, because like for Saint 14 it could have been, for how many lifetimes was he stuck in these quarters of time versus what Osiris's perception of that time. And so you don't really kind of get any kind of sense of what, at least to my knowledge, there's probably a lore book somewhere that kind of expresses this or goes into detail. But like, it's kind of interesting to me to think about, like, um, do each of them have a different sense of how long they were away from the other person? Because Saint 14 was literally like traveling through time for that entire period. Like, did they both perceive, like, let's say it was 50 years that they were separated? Did they both perceive it as 50 years, or did Saint 14 perceive it as like millennia?
Yeah.
Um, and
That's a good
maybe
question.
and maybe that's why it's like it was so tough for Saint 14, because here he's finally back, and then what's like a year, and then Osiris goes into this coma, and so it's like, obviously, like, that's got to be really really hard on Saint 14, versus like, would that, if those roles were reversed, would that be like not as intense? I don't know. Just it kind of f's with the mind a little bit when you think about some of these things. And like,
Oh, totally.
once you start bringing like personal relationships into all of it, it always gets a little like more, again, this is like humanity, and we are kind of getting to this climax of, you know I predict there's somebody's gonna die, or a couple people are gonna die in these next, like, in Lightfall and Final Shape. And like, what is that really gonna mean to the whole outcome of these people that we've kind of known to love over the last decade almost?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
seriously. So I guess this isn't so much a complaint as it is I'm curious to see how this season's going to end. But as of now, it doesn't really feel like a lead up to Lightfall. It doesn't feel like, I don't know, intense enough or related enough. Because, like, I guess to compare it to Season of the Lost, we literally had Savathun, the Witch Queen, imprisoned, and we're talking to her every week, and et cetera, et cetera. So that felt like very much like a direct lead up, very much important. I'm not really sure what, bringing Rasputin online has to do with Lightfall yet, but I guess we'll
Well,
see.
well, I think in the first cutscene, didn't Osiris talk about he had a vision of Neptune. So like we already know we're going to, like, in the game, we already know we're going to Neptune because that's where our dreams were. And at the end of Season of the Haunted, we got the callus ascended to, being a disciple. So like I think the pieces were already kind of like we already know in game what to expect. I agree with you that I think Season of the Lost was like a way better build-up, where it's like literally the first mission that we got at the start of the season is we encounter Savathun, we encase her in carbonite, and then she's just there taunting us for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of led perfectly into the next season. I think it's like because of the way the narrative is already kind of laid out, we've already kind of gotten that. Like we know Callus is going to be a threat. We know we need to go to Neptune.
That's fair. I to be honest, I kind of missed the line about Osiris's dreams being Neptune, because I was playing the dungeon, and no, that makes perfect sense because I was playing the dungeon. He's like, "Oh, is this where my visions were leading me to?" or something, a line along those lines, and I didn't really know what visions he was talking about. I think I missed the line about Neptune along the way somewhere. That might have been a Plunder thing. No, he was dead the entire time. I guess I just missed it, but that makes perfect sense. And okay, so that makes it a little better, because then there's at least some sort of tie. And you're right, everything has been building up to this Cass being a disciple. I don't know, maybe the Nezarec thing will play into it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But
So that was kind of an argument that I had made at the beginning, which I'll actually kind of rescind on, was, well, not at the beginning of this podcast, but kind of, as we were talking about preparation for Witch Queen. And I was kind of like, man, I hope the seasons kind of have a more cohesive throughput. And I think we're actually kind of seeing that now in hindsight, where we have, the Haunted was all about Callus and all of that, and then leading into the previous season with Plunder and how that helps out Osiris, and we find out that he had visions, and now Osiris is kind of like, hey, the Warmind is somehow relevant. Like it at least feels a little bit more like there was an attempt to tie each of the seasons together, or at least bits and pieces of them have some kind of relevance to the next event. Because like before we had Season of the Lost, we had Season of the Splicer, and I don't see how any of that was really relevant to the Witch Queen or Season of the Lost, other than we finally confronted what was the
Coria or whatever her name
Coria,
was.
yeah, which like that was related to Zivu Arath, not necessarily Savathun. So
Was it? I thought this is where I get confused, but I thought Coria was under the control of Savathun. I could be wrong.
maybe
And
you're right.
And it could, I guess, I would argue that part of the throughput of that past one was Osiris being possessed by Savathun the entire 3 seasons or whatever it was.
That's true. That also kind of felt like, that's true. I guess it was like they were like they're kind of puppeteering everything, like affecting Lakshmi with the, influencing Lakshmi to do the portal thing. I guess you're right. I don't know.
But that's fair. I mean, I guess I think part of their design philosophy is to make seasons distinct from one another.
Yeah.
And so there's a different theme every time. So they jump around to various different things, and oftentimes it ends up making it feel disconnected, which is fair. I think that's a fair criticism.
Yeah, I think it probably, though, at the end of Season Lost, it all kind of somewhat came together, and I'm assuming like as this season goes on, there's going to be aha moments.
Yeah, that'll
So we'll just have to see
make
what they
sense.
are.
For sure. I had a question that maybe you could answer. How does Mara know Zivu Wrath is working for the witness? Did I miss that at some point? Is that another thing I missed?
Well, there was the one dialogue with her, and I'm trying to remember what she said. I think there's some explanation, or at least maybe she like deduced.
It's probably in Season Lost or something. Because in this season, she just kind of like starts off. She's like, "Yeah, Zivu Wrath's working for the witness. You know, we don't want her to do anything in behalf of the witness." I'm like, "She's working for the witness?" I mean, I guess that makes sense, but like,
I
I
think
didn't
it
know
was, and is where we need like a lore master. I'm
that. Yeah,
pretty
right.
sure. I'm pretty sure it was explained in something, either in the Witch Queen campaign or during Season Lost or something.
Yeah,
Maybe
and
during Season of the Haunted.
that's possible. So, despite the fact that I'm sitting here, like, kind of lost and confused with some things and just like not being able to keep up with a lot of the different plot developments, I will say I'm very much glad that they're going all in on this sort of thing and making the story essentially completely inaccessible to anyone who's like jumping into it right away, and
Right.
really just like treating the story like all of its viewership has been like in on this since the beginning. I actually appreciate that they're taking all this lore stuff, everything that's been written down by these fantastic authors and everything, and really just making it a cohesive thing. I really appreciate that. Even if I can't keep up sometimes, I'm
Oh
glad
yeah.
that they're doing it this way.
Yeah, no, and it I think it's inevitable when a game like this goes on for this long that y- as a new person you're going to be lost.
Yeah. And it's
Like
the same
there's
concept with it's like a TV show, right? I mean, you
yeah,
can't just jump in on season 7 and
right.
expect to understand what's happening.
Right. And it definitely, there's maybe an argument to be made that at a certain point it's going to be not sustaining in terms of like new player engagement and retention.
Yeah.
Although, like, look at Robbie, right? He started playing Beyond Light and he picked it up. If the game kind of gets its hooks in you, then you will invest that time in watching lore videos and reading those things and being caught up. But I
True.
agree that it's nice to be rewarded as well to see all of these things and get all of these interactions and appreciate why it's kind of a neat idea that Anna Bray and Osiris are having this conversation about something seemingly trivial, like you know what kind of drink do you want to have, but it's all of the implications of these characters being developed over the last few years and sort of like, oh, there's actually meaning behind this conversation more than just, oh, I'm unlocking this lore book for a triumph.
Yep.
Um, yeah, it's all very satisfying
I
and
agree.
it's awesome and exciting to see where this is all going. Like, I think there's no doubts that the story has only been getting better literally since day one. Um,
Yep.
every little tidbit has been building off of it. The people at Bungie that develop all the narrative and the story and all that like should be very proud of the thing that they've produced. This is truly one of the most absurd, nerdy, like lore things that I've ever spent time trying to like understand and engage and bask in its nerdy glory beyond like Star Wars. That's like the
Yep.
only other thing that I've invested that much time into like knowing this many like caveat things because it's so interesting and fun to see it all play out week to week. So
Yep. The people who make this story are clearly very passionate, and it's exciting to see them just be at work and everything.
yep,
It feels like when they bring in like all of this like deep lore stuff all the time and they make references to that and they have this giant interconnected narrative with all this stuff, it feels like your time as or your investment, like emotional and otherwise, as a viewer, I suppose, of this story is respected in that sense, and it's a very rewarding feeling, like he said. I mean, that's why I mean, people are very invested in this stuff and spend a lot of time and energy reading and exploring this like vast world they've created, and that's why everyone was like creaming their pants when Coria showed up for the first time, uh,
right,
since she was introduced in a random piece of text on Bungie.net 7 years ago,
right,
because people are invested in it, and so it's exciting to see them recognize that and explore that, and et cetera, et cetera.
right.
So, moving on to the new weapons and armor stuff, specifically the weapons, because the weapons are more exciting. We got some new stuff. So, seventh Seraph weapons are back.
Yep,
Ikelos weapons are back in the
yep,
form of getting them back from caches, actually. The ones from Warmind where they would play a little Russian music and you'd go open them and
right,
find them. So those are back. Seventh Seraph weapons are back. There's some new stuff, uh, which has a very cool visual aesthetic, I think. It's like this cool blend between like utilitarian, realistic stuff and also the Warmind-esque
right.
or future weapons. But all feels very like human and as opposed to like the previous season which was very Elixni focused and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like half pirate, half fallen.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
This feels much more grounded in reality, which I like.
Yeah.
What's your favorite piece of loot you've gotten this season so far,
Um.
or one that sticks out to you?
Yeah. No, I definitely think so. There's a new. You know me and my fusion rifles.
Hmm.
There's a new Amalon um, stasis fusion rifle that I've gotten a couple rolls on. Nothing exciting yet. It's a 960, which bums me out because those are in a horrible state right now, which we won't talk about, or 980, whatever
Hmm.
the charge rate is. We don't talk about that. I do like the design. I like the Amalon fusion rifles. That's pretty cool. But definitely the pulse rifle, not the ritual one, but I think it's called not posterity. Oh, I don't have dim open, so I can't like reference it.
Yeah, right. I pulled open my like companion app to like
Right.
reference stuff, and I'm like, oh wait,
Right. But it's the Hake one and it's stasis and it's a 4 burst. So it's awesome. I like the 4 burst pulse rifles and it's got a ridiculous loot pool and it's craftable. So it's cool. Um the roll I got's not particularly amazing. It's feeding or it's rapid hit frenzy, but it's like it's kind of one of those like it's a workhorse type thing, so it just feels good to use and it's fun. Um, the new glaive, which I'm also blanking on the name, um, has a really cool perk on it that basically, if you get a kill with the projectile, it increases the melee damage, and then getting subsequent melee kills keeps that buff up, which is awesome because I like using the melee aspect of glaives a lot more than the projectile part. And so it's kind of nice. Like it's neat to see the glaives are getting some love and getting some new perks on them, in addition to like all the other new perks that we've gotten. None of the new perks have really stood out to me besides that one on the glaive, but I haven't gotten a whole lot of them yet. Um, and as always, like you kind of wait for some of the content creators to play around with some of the new ones and tell you which are worth kind of investing time into and all that. And
sure.
but yeah, I think the short answer is that new pulse rifle's pretty nifty. And it feels good. So
Yeah, I'm with you too. I thought the pulse rifle felt good. I have no like I don't know technical feedback for it, but I just know it feels good and
yeah,
it looks cool. I love like the laser sights on everything. For sure,
Yes.
like every weapon's got a laser sight and glaive for some reason.
Yes. Yeah, the weird thing about the glaive is that it's a Hake brand glaive,
Yeah.
which doesn't make any sense because you and I were talking about this. Like, I always thought the glaive itself was meant to be like darkness technology or something, right? Because like Nezarek's whisper was a gift from the witness, and
Or Nezarek, well, the Enigma was the gift from the witness, I think.
right
And
to
then,
us in the pyramid.
yeah, and then the Nezarek's thing was from Season of the Haunted.
Right, but I mean, I think the lore behind that
Oh,
is
was it actually?
that glaive I think was like gifted to him by
Oh, gifted to Nezarek. Oh,
by
yeah,
the
yeah,
disciple
yeah.
of the witness or something like that.
And then Lubre's Ruin is another,
Right.
which is obviously a darkness-related thing. So yeah, it's like every glaive we've gotten has been darkness-related.
Right. And then it's just like, oh, this weapon foundry, by the way, is also in the business of making glaives.
Yeah, it felt a little weird. But now that I think about it, what are the exotic glaives called?
I don't know. I've literally never used them. So
Edge of Concurrence is one of them. That does not look human. An echo of an ancient weapon forged from Vision. I don't think that's probably a darkness related thing too.
yeah, exactly.
Yes, it is. Okay. It talks about sword logic and stuff in the lore. Okay, so it's definitely weird.
Yeah.
Why would Hake of all companies be like, let's just start making glaives? I guess it kind of takes away from, I don't know, the mystery and like
Yeah.
appeal of the weapon,
I agree.
because that was like part of its identity to begin with.
Right.
It's like, oh, this is a weird special thing, and so a little odd, but I do find it hilarious that it has a laser sight on it.
Yes.
It's primarily a melee
Which
weapon.
doesn't really make sense, but it's cool. It's a neat aesthetic. But
Absolutely. Have you got any good rolls on the new Ikelos? Or not new Ikelos weapons? Reissued Ikelos weapons, I should say.
I've not gotten Volt Shot, if that's what you're asking.
No, I haven't gotten We know Robbie got Volt Shot though.
I know. Not really. I've gotten a couple of them, but I don't, War Mind cells have kind of come and gone. And so, like, I think they're neat. I never really got a good Ikelos anything before, so I'm excited that we'll be able to actually craft them. And so I'll kind of play around with them, but I'm not, like, I've got one of each of them in my vault from, like, way back when, and I literally never use them, so now I'll have crafted versions that I'll probably never use, but someday if they ever make War Mind cells relevant again, then I'll have them. But like, I don't like the 180 hand cannons. Not a huge SMG fan. The sniper rifle's pretty cool. I do like the shotgun. That was the original trench barrel beast. And so I'm excited to kind of see and play around with that. I got like an incandescent subsistence roll, which is kind of cool. But yeah, it's just fun to, like, at the beginning of the season, just any new weapon that you get is like, oh, what perks did I get? It's just kind of fun to screw around with just new weapons. So
yeah, for sure. The Ikelos shotgun I enjoy having back. That was my favorite of the Ikelos weapons, so
definitely
that one's cool. And I'll bring up the dungeon again. Those are part of the dungeon loot pool, correct? Or is that
Just
the 7th Seraph one?
the 7th Seraph, and there's just the carbine and the service revolver.
Interesting.
And they're both pretty anticlimactic. But yeah, we'll save that for the dungeon discussion.
Interesting. All right, so unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. So thank you guys for hopping on and listening to us. And please join us next time for our Spire the Watcher deep dive episode. Peace out.
You can put this voice recording away and go on with your life, because you and I both know you'd have me yapping in your ear for the rest of your days.
Want to further the discussion? Get in touch with us at any of our Twitter handles, all of which can be found in our podcast description.